History isn't just written by the wise, it's also written by people who passed laws so absurd they sound fake. Today, we're diving into the 50 dumbest political, military, and religious laws ever created. Rules that punished thinking, criminalized common sense, and turned belief into bureaucracy. From armies banning fear, governments regulating imagination, to religions legislating daily life in ridiculous ways. These laws shaped lives, ruined futures, and somehow survived official approval. Laugh, rage, and question reality, because every single rule here was once taken seriously. In ancient Sparta, Greece, military law punished soldiers not for cowardice alone, but for asterisk, showing fear asterisk. Men who retreated were forced to wear patched cloaks, shave half their beards, and endure public humiliation. The state believed fear weakened national strength, so emotion itself became criminal. No psychological care, no tactical retreat logic, only shame. This law didn't create bravery, it created silent trauma, reckless deaths, and a culture where survival was dishonor and obedience mattered more than life itself. In Imperial Japan, military doctrine during World War II treated surrender as a crime worse than death. Soldiers were legally forbidden to be captured alive, forcing suicides, last stands, and civilian massacres. The law merged nationalism with spiritual purity, declaring that dying for the emperor erased all shame. This wasn't strategy, it was ideological extremism encoded into policy. Thousands died needlessly, families were erased, and survival itself became illegal under a state that valued symbolism more than human existence. In North Korea, religion is effectively illegal unless it worships the state. Citizens are required to revere the Kim family with rituals resembling religious devotion, while traditional faiths are punishable by labor camps or execution. The law replaces God with government, belief with obedience. Prayer becomes treason, curiosity becomes heresy. This isn't atheism, it's enforced worship. The result is a nation where faith is rewritten as loyalty and spiritual freedom is treated as a political disease. In Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, laws banned women from laughing loudly, showing ankles, or speaking to unrelated men. Education for girls was criminalized, justified as religious protection. These weren't cultural customs, they were enforceable punishments backed by violence. Faith was reduced to control, morality to silence. A society half-blinded itself by law, calling oppression divine order. The damage wasn't spiritual, it was generational, erasing voices, futures, and identities under the excuse of holiness. In Nazi Germany, the state passed laws redefining religion to align with racial ideology. Jewish people were banned from public life, marriages, professions, and eventually existence, legally. Faith and ethnicity were criminalized through paperwork. Bureaucracy became a weapon. These laws didn't happen overnight. They were signed, stamped, and normalized. Evil didn't arrive screaming. It arrived filing forms. The terrifying lesson is how legality can disguise atrocity when morality is removed from governance. In medieval England, laws allowed execution for criticizing the church, even verbally. Questioning doctrine was labeled heresy, punishable by burning. Thought itself was illegal. Curiosity threatened power, so inquiry became a crime. These laws didn't protect faith, they protected authority. Science stalled, fear ruled, and ignorance was enforced by fire. When belief cannot be questioned, it stops being belief and becomes captivity, trapping entire societies inside officially approved ignorance. In Saudi Arabia, religious police once enforced laws punishing men for hairstyles and women for driving. Morality squads dictated behavior under religious justification, arresting people for music, mixing genders, or prayer mistakes. The law blurred faith and surveillance. Personal conscience was replaced with patrols. While reforms exist today, decades of rigid enforcement shaped fear-based obedience, proving how easily belief systems can be weaponized when the state becomes the interpreter of God. In fascist Italy under Mussolini, laws required absolute loyalty to the state above religion, family, or conscience. Children were legally indoctrinated, military service glorified, dissent criminalized. The government demanded emotional allegiance, not just compliance. Politics became religion, uniforms replaced values, and obedience was moralized. This law system didn't just rule bodies, it aimed to rewrite identity itself, proving authoritarianism works best when it claims to be sacred. In ancient Rome, soldiers could be executed for losing their shield, regardless of circumstances. Retreat, injury, or chaos didn't matter. The law prioritized symbols over survival. Military honor was reduced to equipment possession. Thousands died not because they lost battles, but because they lost objects. The state preferred dead soldiers to imperfect ones. Discipline turned into cruelty, and loyalty became a trap where common sense was legally forbidden. In Iran, post-revolution religious laws criminalized un-Islamic behavior, from clothing choices to music tastes. Punishments included lashes, imprisonment, and public shaming. These laws didn't unify morality, they enforced conformity. Personal interpretation of faith was replaced by state-approved belief. When religion becomes law, spirituality dies first. What remains is fear dressed as devotion, and obedience mistaken for righteousness. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, religious practice, education, and even wearing glasses were criminalized. The regime believed intelligence and faith threatened ideological purity. Laws forced citizens into labor camps, banned worship entirely, and executed monks, teachers, and anyone appearing educated. This wasn't secularism, it was enforced ignorance. By law, memory itself was dangerous. The country was reset to year zero, proving how governments can legally erase culture, history, and humanity when ideology is treated as absolute truth. In Soviet Russia, criticizing the state or practicing religion openly could result in imprisonment or execution. Atheism was enforced through law, churches were destroyed, and belief was labeled counter-revolutionary. Thought crimes were real crimes. Loyalty to ideology replaced morality, and fear replaced faith. The law didn't protect citizens, it monitored them. Millions vanished into gulags, not for actions but for ideas, showing how political systems collapse when laws punish internal belief instead of external harm. In ancient China under Qin Shi Huang, books were burned and scholars buried alive under legal orders. Confucian texts were outlawed to control thought and unify ideology. Knowledge itself was declared dangerous. The law didn't fear rebellion, it feared memory. By erasing history, the state tried to manufacture loyalty. This wasn't governance, it was intellectual genocide. When rulers fear ideas, laws become tools of erasure. Proving power often survives by destroying what people are allowed to know. In medieval Spain during the Inquisition, laws allowed torture and execution for suspected heresy without proof. Accusations were enough. Neighbors turned into informants. Fear replaced community, and faith became a courtroom weapon. These laws claimed to protect religion but destroyed compassion. Guilt was assumed, innocence irrelevant. The terrifying part wasn't belief, it was legality. Evil didn't hide. It wore official seals, proving how law can sanctify cruelty when certainty replaces humility. In Myanmar, military-backed laws restricted religious expression and citizenship for Rohingya Muslims, rendering them stateless. Marriage required approval. Movement was limited, and faith marked people as illegal. These weren't unofficial practices, they were codified. The law decided who deserved existence. Religion became a checkbox for survival. This bureaucratic cruelty shows how persecution doesn't always look violent at first. Sometimes it looks like paperwork slowly erasing entire populations. In Victorian England, laws allowed women to be institutionalized for hysteria, disagreement, or disobedience. Medical authority merged with law, silencing women legally. Husbands could commit wives with minimal evidence. Emotion became illness. Independence became pathology. These laws weren't ancient, they were modern. Society used legality to justify control, proving oppression doesn't require hatred, only systems that label freedom as dysfunction. In Francoist Spain, laws criminalized political dissent, censored art, and enforced Catholic morality nationwide. Divorce, contraception, and criticism were illegal. Religion became state policy, not personal belief. The law didn't guide morals, it dictated them. Fear masqueraded as order. Generations grew up learning silence as survival. This fusion of church and state shows how easily faith can be stripped of compassion when authority claims divine endorsement. In ancient Athens, citizens could be legally exiled through ostracism without committing crimes. Popular vote, not justice, decided fate. Democracy punished threat perception, not wrongdoing. Influential thinkers were removed to preserve power balance. Law became social anxiety codified. This wasn't tyranny, it was majority fear legalized. Even early democracies proved that law isn't automatically moral, only reflective of who holds collective power at the moment. In ISIS-controlled territories, laws mandated execution for smoking, music, or incorrect prayer. Religion was enforced with brutality, not belief. These weren't traditions, they were modern extremist interpretations weaponized through law. Faith became a checklist enforced by death. The law didn't nurture spirituality, it destroyed it. When rules are absolute and mercy absent, religion becomes a tool of terror rather than meaning. In United States military history, "Don't ask, don't tell" legally forced LGBTQ soldiers to hide identity or face discharge. Service was allowed only through silence. Honesty was illegal. The law punished truth while demanding loyalty. Thousands were removed despite competence and bravery. This wasn't ancient ignorance, it was recent policy. It proves even modern democracies can legalize discrimination while claiming equality. In ancient Egypt, criticizing the pharaoh was illegal because he was considered a living god. Political dissent became blasphemy. Law fused religion and power so completely that disagreement was treated as cosmic disorder. Citizens weren't governed, they were ritually controlled. Justice depended on divine status, not fairness. This system didn't protect belief, it protected hierarchy. When rulers declare themselves sacred, law stops serving people and starts preserving illusion, obedience, and fear as holy duties. In Nazi-occupied Poland, German laws made helping Jews punishable by death, including entire families. Compassion itself became illegal. Ordinary morality was criminalized through occupation law. This wasn't chaos, it was administration. Paper decrees turned neighbors into liabilities and kindness into a capital offense. The law redefined humanity as treason. It shows how legality can be inverted so completely that survival requires silence and goodness becomes the most dangerous crime. In ancient Aztec civilization, religious law required mass human sacrifice to prevent cosmic collapse. Thousands were legally killed to feed the gods. Refusal wasn't disbelief, it was treason against reality itself. Faith demanded blood and law enforced it. The system normalized terror as sacred duty. When belief is structured around fear of apocalypse, morality collapses into ritualized violence, proving religion can justify anything when survival myths go unchallenged. In Stalinist Soviet Union, military laws punish soldiers returning from German captivity, assuming betrayal. Survivors were imprisoned or executed. Endurance became guilt. The law preferred dead heroes to living witnesses. Loyalty was measured by suffering, not service. This policy erased nuance, humanity, and trauma. It showed how authoritarian systems punish survival because survival contradicts propaganda. Law became narrative enforcement, not justice. In medieval Japan, under Bushido-influenced law, failure could demand ritual suicide. Honor outweighed life. While cultural, it was legally and socially enforced. Survival after defeat brought shame worse than death. This wasn't personal choice, it was systemic pressure. The law romanticized self-destruction as virtue. When legal culture glorifies death over learning, societies freeze progress and normalize irreversible loss as moral success. In colonial America, Puritan laws punished blasphemy, adultery, and nonconformity with execution or exile. Religious uniformity was enforced through law. Faith wasn't personal, it was mandatory. Dissent meant danger. These laws didn't preserve morality, they enforced sameness. Ironically, a society fleeing persecution recreated it legally. It proves oppression doesn't disappear with migration. It follows belief when power is unquestioned. In modern China, laws restrict religious practice outside state-approved institutions. Underground churches, mosques, and temples face raids, surveillance, and arrests. Faith is permitted only when registered and monitored. Belief becomes licensed behavior. This system doesn't ban religion. It domesticates it. Spiritual life must align with political stability. The law treats faith not as conscience, but as a variable needing regulation and control. In ancient Babylon, under Hammurabi's code, punishments depended on social class. The same crime received different sentences based on status. Equality didn't exist before law. Justice was stratified. The law openly valued lives unequally. This wasn't hidden bias, it was explicit design. When law encodes hierarchy, morality becomes arithmetic, and fairness becomes impossible by definition. In Franco-era Chile, emergency laws allowed detention, torture, and disappearance without trial. Political belief itself was criminalized. Law suspended rights indefinitely. Citizens vanished legally. Order replaced justice. These weren't accidents, they were statutes. It shows how temporary security laws become permanent tools of fear, rewriting legality to protect power rather than people. In ancient Thebes, Greece, religious law punished refusal to bury enemies, believing it angered the gods. State loyalty conflicted with divine duty. Obedience meant spiritual doom. Compassion meant execution. Law forced impossible choices. Sophocles' Antigone wasn't fiction. It reflected real legal dilemmas. When laws collide with conscience, tragedy isn't metaphorical, it's inevitable. In apartheid-era South Africa, laws enforced racial segregation. in housing, marriage, education, and even park benches. Love across races was illegal. Identity determined rights. The law didn't hide discrimination, it advertised it. Entire lives were scripted by skin color. These weren't ancient mistakes. They were modern policies defended as order. By legalizing inequality, the state normalized cruelty and taught generations that injustice can feel ordinary when stamped as law. In ancient Assyria, military law mandated extreme punishments, flaying, impalement, and mutilation for disobedience or rebellion. Terror wasn't accidental, it was policy. Fear maintained empire. The law aimed to traumatize witnesses, not just punish offenders. Governance through horror was strategic. When law becomes spectacle, justice disappears. The state didn't want loyalty, it wanted paralysis, proving that some legal systems are designed not to correct behavior, but to annihilate resistance psychologically. In communist Romania, under Ceausescu, abortion and contraception were illegal to increase population. Women's bodies became state property. Pregnancy was monitored, miscarriages investigated, and deaths ignored. Law invaded biology. This wasn't pro-life, it was pro-control. Thousands of women died from unsafe procedures. Children were abandoned en masse. The law treated reproduction as production, proving how easily policy can turn intimate life into national machinery. In medieval France, laws allowed torture to extract confessions, believing pain revealed truth. Innocence didn't matter, endurance did. The legal system trusted suffering more than evidence. People confessed to impossible crimes just to end agony. Law replaced investigation with violence. Justice became a test of pain tolerance. When systems confuse confession with truth, cruelty becomes efficient and innocence irrelevant. In Nazi Germany, the Lebensborn program legally encouraged selective breeding to create racially pure children. Women were incentivized to bear children for the state. Biology became ideology. Law turned reproduction into eugenics. Children were evaluated like assets. This wasn't fringe, it was official policy. When governments legislate genetics, humanity is reduced to data, and morality collapses into spreadsheets. In ancient India, under certain Manusmriti interpretations, caste-based laws restricted occupation, movement, and dignity by birth. Social mobility was illegal. A person's life was predetermined legally at birth. This wasn't cultural suggestion, it was enforceable hierarchy. Law sanctified inequality as cosmic order. When inequality is declared divine, injustice becomes invisible, persisting for centuries under the illusion of destiny. In Cold War East Germany, the Stasi legally surveilled citizens, using informants embedded in families and friendships. Privacy was abolished by law. Suspicion became civic duty. Trust was dangerous. The state didn't just watch actions, it monitored thoughts. Law normalized paranoia. A society where everyone might be an informant eventually collapses inward, proving surveillance destroys communities long before it protects states. In ancient Rome, slaves had no legal personhood. Killing a slave wasn't murder, it was property damage. Humanity was excluded by statute. Law decided who counted as human. This system powered empire but erased morality. When law denies personhood, cruelty becomes administrative. It reminds us that legality and humanity are not synonymous and never automatically aligned. In Taliban-era Afghanistan, kite flying, music, and television were illegal. Joy itself was criminalized. Law enforced emotional austerity. Culture was erased in the name of purity. Children learned fear before play. These laws didn't preserve values, they annihilated expression. When happiness is forbidden, obedience becomes the only permitted emotion, and society forgets how to be alive. In Imperial Russia, serfs were legally bound to landowners, unable to leave, marry, or work freely. Humans were legally tethered to soil. Mobility was a crime. Freedom required permission. The law didn't manage labor, it owned lives. This system delayed progress for centuries, proving how deeply destructive laws can be when they confuse stability with permanent human captivity. In fascist Japan, the peace preservation law criminalized thoughts opposing the emperor or state ideology. People were arrested not for actions but for beliefs. Dangerous thinking became a legal category. Families informed on each other to survive. The law didn't punish rebellion. It preempted it. By treating ideology as a crime scene, the state proved how fear works best when law enters the mind, not just the streets. In medieval Europe, witchcraft laws allowed execution based on dreams, rumors, or spectral accusations. No evidence was required. Fear replaced proof. Thousands, mostly women, were legally tortured and burned for imaginary crimes. Law became mass hysteria with authority. These statutes didn't protect society. They projected anxiety onto scapegoats. When superstition becomes enforceable, justice collapses and terror masquerades as moral cleansing. In Ba'athist Iraq under Saddam Hussein, laws mandated execution for insulting the president. Jokes, comments, or perceived disrespect were punishable by death. Loyalty wasn't political, it was compulsory worship. The law demanded emotional submission, not just obedience. Fear stabilized power. When criticism becomes treason, truth disappears, and silence becomes the only legal language left in society. In ancient Maya civilization, religious law required bloodletting rituals by rulers to appease gods. Self-harm was mandated leadership duty. Pain symbolized legitimacy. Refusal meant divine betrayal. Governance merged with sacrifice, and suffering became political currency. When law equates pain with virtue, leadership turns masochistic, and authority is proven not by wisdom, but by willingness to bleed. In Victorian-era Britain, homosexuality was illegal, punishable by imprisonment or chemical castration. Love became a crime. Identity itself was evidence. Brilliant minds like Alan Turing were legally destroyed. These laws didn't protect morality, they enforced conformity. When law punishes existence, society loses talent, compassion, and progress. Proving intolerance is always self-destructive, even when dressed as order. In ancient Persia, subjects were required to bow to the emperor under legal obligation. Refusal was treason. Respect wasn't earned, it was enforced. Gesture replaced loyalty. The law policed posture, not policy. When authority mandates reverence, power becomes insecure. True respect dies the moment it becomes compulsory, turning obedience into theater and leadership into performance. In Pinochet's Chile, curfews and emergency laws criminalized being outside at night. Presence became suspicious. Thousands were detained or disappeared without charges. Law blurred safety and control. Normal life became illegal after sunset. These laws taught citizens that survival required invisibility, proving authoritarianism thrives when legality turns everyday existence into probable guilt. In ancient Carthage, religious law allegedly sanctioned child sacrifice during crises to appease gods. Infants were offerings, not citizens. Fear of divine punishment justified irreversible loss. Whether exaggerated or real, Belief systems allowed legality to override instinct. When law sanctifies the unthinkable, morality is suspended and terror is reframed as duty. In Cold War United States, McCarthy-era laws and hearings destroyed lives over suspected communist sympathy. Careers ended without evidence. Accusation equaled guilt. Fear replaced freedom. The law didn't protect democracy, it panicked it. When security obsessions dominate governance, paranoia becomes policy, and liberty quietly evaporates under patriotic language. In Cold War United States, McCarthy-era laws and hearings destroyed lives over suspected communist sympathy. Careers ended without evidence. Accusation equaled guilt. Fear replaced freedom. The law didn't protect democracy, it panicked it. When security obsessions dominate governance, paranoia becomes policy, and liberty quietly evaporates under patriotic language.